and say my prayer. Little piece of bread to my mouth, little tea to wash it out. It's my daily tribulation, even though I'm a working man. I work so hard to make ends meet, oh yeah, with one suit and one shoe to my feet. Days are getting so hard, yeah, but I got to keep on pushing on this 9 to 5, working to stay alive. On my 9 to 5, working till sun goes down. As the sun sets in the west, I pack my things and head on home, thinking about tomorrow's journey as I try these streets alone. It's my daily tribulation, oh yeah, searching for liberation, yeah. Got to step out of Babylon, take a step to Mount Zion. Days are getting so hard, yeah, but I got to keep on pushing on this 9 to 5, working to stay alive. Oh, on this 9 to 5, yeah, working till sun goes down, sun goes down. Oh, days are getting so hard, yeah, but I got to keep on pushing on this 9 to 5, working to stay alive. Oh, on this 9 to 5, working till sun goes down, sun goes down, sun goes on this 9 to 5, yeah, working to stay alive. Oh, on this 9 to 5, yeah, working till sun goes down. Oh Lord, got to keep working, got to keep working.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. I'm not sure if my audio is going AZ. Can you tell me if we have the audio working properly tonight? It's fine. Great. Thank you so much. Well, welcome to our Thursday program. Waiting for others to join us here. Expecting a check-in with Insight's book editor, W. Foster Graham, talking about things he's doing, and others may join us as well. We'd love to have you join us if you've been checking this program out, if you're interested in bringing your voice to Conversations with Al McFarlane. We're open and available to connect with you on things that are important to you. How do you do it? Just go to the comment area and put in your name and number or your email address, and we'll send you a link to bring you on the program with me. The program is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Just by way of background, I am the editor and owner of Insight News in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. It's a weekly community newspaper that's been around since 1974. I believe I started this as a magazine in 1974 and relaunched it as a newspaper in 1976. Parenthetically, my company is operating distance-wise, or what do you call it, remotely. Everybody on my team is operating remotely now because of the COVID environment. Our office is basically empty. We check in. We manage our distribution of our newspaper from the office. The office itself is in the heart of the Black community of Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, and our office is called the Marcus Garvey House. We call it Marcus Garvey House because I'm a Jamaican on my father's side, and Marcus Garvey is one of my heroes. So if somebody is listening who is connected with the work, the vision, the mission of Marcus Garvey, we'd love to hear from you, to love to have you in this conversation. And so the point I was going to make on the way to that aside was that where I'm operating from right now in my residence in North Minneapolis, a few blocks from my office, is right upstairs from the dining room table where we launched this publication in 1976. Background-wise, we started Insight as a magazine in 74. I worked for a Minneapolis printing company. The printing company was called Graphic Services, Inc. They were in Northeast Minneapolis, which at that time was sort of a neighborhood that was hostile to Black people. But that's where I worked. I was a printing salesman, and then I converted to run a public relations division of that company called Midwest Public Relations. I convinced the guy that I worked for to let me create a magazine for my community, North Minneapolis, where I am right now. And I did that because the printing company specialized in trade publications. So every month they put out a publication called Twin Cities Tool and Die Digest, Midwest Motor Transport Purchasing Management, things like that, just general, what I call, general market trade publications. So the capacity was there, and I asked this guy, let me start a magazine for my neighborhood, my training, my background. I'm a journalist, University of Minnesota, and I'd already been a reporter for the daily newspaper in St. Paul before I ventured out to do what I was doing at that time. And he agreed. We launched Insight in 1974 as a monthly magazine in the format of the other trade magazines. Very beautiful, very nice, very special for the Black community that I lived in and that I served, that I loved. And then after a year of publishing it monthly, I was able to buy the rights to the publication. I spent a year working as a janitor at night in one of the rich suburbs of Twin Cities, of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And during the day, I knocked on doors of businesses and agencies, community organizations, asking if they would support by purchasing advertising or doing contracts with me to launch Insight again as a newspaper. And I had demonstrated the capacity to create and deliver a quality product. What we did as the magazine was nothing less than phenomenal. Nothing like that had been done or seen coming out of the Black community in Minneapolis, though there were several great Black newspapers, but not a Black magazine that had sustained itself. So I was successful in reaching neighborhood organizations and businesses and was able to relaunch Insight, not as a magazine, but as a newspaper for the neighborhood I'm sitting in now. All that to say, I reflect on the fact that I'm just upstairs from where I was at my dining room table downstairs when I launched this business under my ownership. And we've come a mighty, mighty long way. So from 76 to now, uninterrupted publication. At first, we were every other week or bi-monthly. Then we moved to weekly. At first, we were a tabloid newspaper. Then we changed to a broadsheet. And over the years, we grew and we have become the largest circulation and the most profitable community, Black community or ethnic community newspaper in the state of Minnesota. So I feel good about that, but I know that there is so much more to be done that can be done. And I therefore invoke and relish the spirit of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who said, up you mighty people, you can be what you will, you can become what you will. I think he's saying you can be who you are. And I think that's the challenge of today. How do we continue to move towards becoming our true selves? How do we discover the power and channel the passion and acknowledge the lived experiences that we bring to each other and to create community? I think we're at, I've heard the word a lot now, an inflection point, both in this city, Minneapolis, Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and around the country, perhaps around the world. I often reflect on the fact and talk to my guests every week about this being ground zero of the reckoning that is occasioned by the murder of George Floyd, about 5 miles from where I am right now, over in South Minneapolis. That murder. Hey, Yusuf, how you doing, man?
Good afternoon, brother.
Good to see you. So I'm doing a soliloquy here. Jump in when you want to. I'm reflecting, Yusuf, on how I came to start Insight News, both as a magazine and as a newspaper, and where we are right now. My comment is that we're at an inflection point, and I think that is signaled by the communities and the world's reaction to the murder, the televised murder of George Floyd in South Minneapolis, a scant several miles from where I'm sitting right now in North Minneapolis. I think that there's an awakening afoot at the moment. It's happened before, but I can tell you, I believe from where I stand as a communicator, as an observer, and I describe myself as a witness, it's happening again as we speak. And so today, they're beginning the jury selection in the trial of the other 3 former police officers who were charged in the murder of George Floyd. And so
that's the federal trial for the civil rights violation.
It's the federal trial. The state's trial will follow
in June.
Yeah, but it's an important occasion. I know that today at around 4 o'clock, there's going to be a rally or so, and there'll be a motorcade rally since it's like a gazillion degrees below zero today. It's cold, so there won't be an outdoor march, but there will be a protest, a motorized protest, a caravan driving around the federal courthouse in downtown St. Paul. The point being, people are committed to keeping the public aware of what happened and what we have to do to both prevent it and make sure that people are held accountable in every way. So that's kind of a background. I'm going to introduce you. I don't know if you know W. Foster Graham. Yusuf, you know him at all or not?
Not at all, but it's my pleasure, brother. How are you?
Brother W.D., can you hear us, or can you
he
talk?
Looks like he's frozen.
Yeah. Good.
He's coming from his telephone, I think, and so there might be some bandwidth issues there. But we see you. Your voice comes across a little bit muffled there. Try it again. How you doing, W. Foster Graham? W.D. Foster Graham.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, well, listen, your picture is great. It's still, that's fine. We can hear your voice just good, too. You you're out right now. You come back in. He'll come back in a minute. Yusuf, how you doing, man? What's on your mind?
Pretty good, brother. Several things. I have been saying that in view of the George Floyd verdict, the Breonna Taylor verdict, the Ahmaud Arbery verdict, and the Dante Wright verdict, that we have a gentle wind at our backs. Mm-hmm. And I say that not so much to capitalize on the victimization. My good friend Raj pointed out that it's not really a win. These are things that should have happened all along.
Mm-hmm.
I say we have the wind at our back because of the increased awareness of the issues. And when you look at the arrest records, when you look at the use of force, when you look at the felony diversion, other convictions within the police records, the county courts, the criminal justice, and the reentry system, there's a significant disparity in terms of how African Americans interact with law enforcement from initial contact to release and reentry. And I think that there is a greater awareness of that disparity, which is what I refer to as the wind at our back in terms of us needing to strike. You and I have discussed in the past that billions of dollars have been committed for race relations, for inclusion, for equity, for whatever the corporate and foundation communities want to call it. Recently in the news here in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, what was the amount that went to the organization to distribute to individuals in our community?
$50 million.
$50 million
from one source. That source is the Bush Foundation.
Bush Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So when I say the wind is on our back, I think people are more open-minded and willing to listen to our concerns about inclusion, about the inequities within the criminal justice system. And I think that the federal civil rights violation case against the three officers and the four verdicts which I mentioned are an indication of that, because the case of Muhammad Moore, the case of Kim Potter, and the case of Derek Chauvin were the first three cases in the history of the state of Minnesota where a police officer was found guilty for egregious behavior, brutality, or murder, against African-American citizens. So I think this is a shot across the bow of law enforcement. And unfortunately, what one law enforcement member does tends to color the law enforcement community as a whole. And just as people say, I didn't own slaves, I had nothing to do with slavery, you can't blame me. Many of the decent people in law enforcement are saying, I've never murdered anyone or mishandled anyone. I don't know why we're all being blamed. It's because when we see law enforcement, we see a member of the United States Armed Services, the National Guard, the courts, the correction system, everybody who encompasses that particular segment of our community. So unfortunately, what happened in Ferguson, what happened to Trayvon Martin, what happened to Michael Brown, what happened to the brother in New York for selling an individual cigarette, the punishment for which was a $25 misdemeanor ticket, had 9 people take him down and suffocate him to death, affects law enforcement or colors law enforcement across the country. And I think for the people that say, I didn't have anything to do with slavery, I didn't own any slaves, Isabel Wilkerson, in her most recent book about caste, says that if you inherit or buy an old house and it's got a leaky roof or plumbing or creaky floors, you own it, okay? And you own this house. And when I talk about between 1780 and 1859, that 80% of U.S. presidents owned slaves, including 8 while they were in the White House, and the fact that 18 of the first 30 Supreme Court justices owned slaves. You own that, okay? We own that. And that has consequences that have an impact on us in the law, in the decisions they made, in the interests that they protected and looked out for, in the people they felt obliged to serve. That has an impact down to this day, okay? And we all own some responsibility in terms of those consequences and trying to address them. So,
great point.
The point about, the federal trial, the state trial for murder or aiding and abetting murder, which comes up in June, are the residue of this awakening on the part of the public and the criminal justice system. And then our former president has been in the news in terms of the January 6th committee in the House that's looking into the attempted insurrection and coup, the Civil War Part 2, and also in terms of, his fraudulent overestimation of his worth or underestimation of his worth, depending on whether it was his brother's daughter seeking her fair share of the assets which he left to her, or his tax and lending and other misfortunes. And I think that those two things are concurrently about to come to a head significantly and really uncover the president's role in the January 6th terrorist uprising, and in terms of the fraudulent practices of the Trump business empire, which have been taking place, for decades. So there's a lot going on, and then put COVID on top of that, high school students of all races walking out because they're concerned about their safety, the overburdening on the medical system, the fact that you've got the anti-vaxxers, including a lot of Trump people, spreading misinformation that is literally killing people. These are dire times in our community and in our country.
Speaking of Trump, first of all, I want to bring in our brother, WD. I was shocked, and I shouldn't have been, in the reportage of his recent trip to Arizona. He talked to a rally of his followers there. Shocked for two reasons. One, his statement, the framing of the photograph had a whole bunch of black folks with blacks for Trumps, as if
T-shirts. Yeah, they're handsomely paid for their service too, brother.
Amazing, just unbelievable. But that's just cheap showmanship. That's what it is. And the second thing is he was making statements that his statements told his white audience that they're being shoved aside, that now he hears that they're being made to ride in the back of the bus, and all the tropes that reflected conditions we lived with.
The dog whistles.
Now he's saying that that's happening to them and how it's unacceptable. And so this guy is absolutely amazingly crazy, but I think dangerous still. And I think, though Mahmoud would say, when the demagogues make declarations like segregation now, segregation forever, it is indicative of the fissure, the crack, and the demise of the enterprise. But that statement itself doesn't reveal the cost of the change. And we may be moving towards an arena where the cost may be great. If you recall, I think in a couple weeks ago, we talked with Kamal King, and Kamal was saying that he feared that, we're moving dangerously close to civil war. And I think in one of our shows, I made reference to an interview we did, or stories we had in the paper about generals in the Army reporting that to the public that they were concerned about the number of white supremacists in the armed forces.
Yeah,
big issue. So the question is, what we do? But you mentioned, the idea of books. I'm going to switch to WD. WD, how you doing? Good to see you. And jump in. WD Foster Graham was the books editor.
See you too.
For Insight News.
Nice to meet you, brother.
Pleasure to meet you, Yusuf. So what are you working on and writing right now, WD? Because I want to, and Yusuf and I talk. Yusuf usually talks about books, so we'll have a chance to talk about what's on his bookshelf, what he's reading, and have you maybe point us towards things you're reading or things that we should be looking out for as readers in our community. So you've got two articles coming up, I think. Talk about those first of all.
He's frozen again.
Well, I recently read books by Tierra Caldwell. Okay. Mm-hmm. I recently read two books. One was by brother Tierra Caldwell called Ducking. And I guess how we as African Americans can definitely remove ourselves from toxic relationships and build positivity within ourselves.
You know what, WD? Why don't we do this? turn off your
Minnesota Black
camera.
authors that I have reviewed was called Bit.
Turn off your camera and just have the voice, because maybe that's consuming too much bandwidth and causing your sound to lose a little bit. We can hear you quite well, but turn the camera off.
Okay.
And just do the audio. Let's see how that sounds. Let's see if it makes a difference. So go ahead and continue with your train of
just
thought.
it.
Mm-hmm. So continue with the thoughts you were explaining.
Okay, the second book that I reviewed is The second book that I reviewed was called Busy Ain't the Half of It. The brothers that collaborated with it are Frederick Smith and Chaz Lamar Cruz. And that book is all one who's in his 40s and his nephew that's in his late 20s, and how they're just navigating not only relationships, but also dealing with the world of Hollywood as it exists and its attitudes toward African Americans. And being a romance novel, it gets a happily ever after, but you have to go through some things to get there.
Brother Foster, I'm reminded of a book by Donald Bogle called Tom's, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks that talked about blacks in Hollywood.
Yes.
And I want to ask if you intend to review a book that I just got, and I'm dying to read, but I have to finish the current book I'm reading by Eddie Glaude. It's the 1619 Project book, 700 pages, that greatly expands on the original 1619 Project essays that appeared in the New York Times Sunday magazine. Are you planning to review that in the near future?
Well, I'd be happy to. Just send it. Yep, that's on my to-be-read list, so definitely send it my way.
Yes,
We'll get it to you. That's a good idea. I'm reading a couple of things, rereading them. One is The Miseducation.
So I would look forward to reading
it. Carter G. Woodson. That's such a prophetic book, Al, because it could have been written this week.
Absolutely. You know? That's what I'm saying to myself as I read it. This is uncanny almost. And it's written in 1933, I think, when it was published.
Yeah.
And I'm also reading a book by Marcus Garvey. And it's Marcus Garvey's, I can't think of the name of the book right now, not right in front of me, but it's his instruction on how to build community, how to build a nation. And I read the first chapter. He starts off by saying, Brother Foster Graham, how important reading is, that we have to really insist on reading and to read critically, to not waste time on things that don't deliver, great plots and great value, great insights, but use reading with a certain ferocity to examine history, to examine science, to examine mathematics, to examine culture and art, and to expand your capability to both incorporate knowledge that exists in your daily activities. I think that's critical instruction. And I think a conversation like this is part of encouraging and reminding us as a community how we have treasured and valued the ability to read and use reading as part of our emancipation strategy. Yusuf, what do you think?
Well, two things, Al. One, I think the seminal work on Marcus Mosiah Garvey was written by Dr. Tony Martin, who used to teach at the University of Minnesota. And that book is titled The Organizational and Ideological Struggles of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. And a lot of people don't realize that Elijah Muhammad was imprisoned in Sandstone Prison here in Minnesota because he enrolled his children in the UNIA school in Detroit. And he was jailed for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Marcus Garvey hired 6,000 people in the Negro Factories Corporation. He had chapters in 38 states and 42 foreign countries. And if you had one of his newspapers anywhere in the British Empire, and they used to say the sun never sets in the British Empire, you were sentenced either to death immediately or to life in prison. And there was a young lawyer who had just graduated from law school and went to work for the Justice Department, who spent 12 years trying to frame Marcus Garvey. Okay, he had 5 people on Garvey's payroll, followed him all over the country, and after 12 years was only able to charge him with selling shares in the Black Star steamship line for 25 cents a piece in the mail. And that young lawyer would go on for the next 50 years to have 8 presidents in his back pocket, and to refer to Dr. Martin Luther King, whose birthday we celebrated this week, as a communist and the most notorious liar in America. That man was, of course, J. Edgar Hoover, with his pantyhose, girdle-wearing self, attacking every member of the civil rights movement who could be identified, and raising havoc through, his private security force. But Marcus Garvey was such an incredible individual. The first person to sell out Madison Square Garden, the man who met with the Ku Klux Klan and said, I am as violently anti-white as you are anti-black, and we are pro-black people. We're not anti-white people. And met with the head of Liberia when it was deemed a resettlement colony for freed African slaves. And the FBI and the State Department and everybody else told the Liberians, don't you dare meet with this man. We'll rain hell down on you if you set up some linkages between him and Africa. That's all we need. And finally imprisoned Marcus Garvey in Atlanta, and then deported him back to Jamaica in very poor health. But he was a master organizer, teacher, capacity builder, giant in our community. And Shirley Chisholm's father, Malcolm X's father, Elijah Muhammad, all of the early African-American leadership in the past century were people who came up through the Garvey movement. Charles Diggs in Detroit, part of the Diggs family, was elected to the Michigan State Legislature on the UNIA-endorsed ticket. And so Garvey's influence, the red, black, and green flag, Marcus Garvey in the 30s said, every race has a flag but a coon. And that's where the red, black, and green came from. The red for the fact that the same blood flows through our veins, the black for color, culture, and consciousness, and the green for the continent, Mother Africa and the Caribbean. And we still use that today and don't understand where it came from. And you talked earlier, I just want to say this in closing, about Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson is the dean of Black history. He was the founder of Negro History Week. And then in 1976, in honor of the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary, it became African or Black American History Month. And this man traveled the country, gave up his academic position, his fame and fortune, to speak in barbershops and church basements and picnics and barbecues and promote Negro history study clubs. And 2 of his scholarly journals are still published to this day, almost 100 years after they were begun, Quarterly Negro History Bulletin and Scholarly Digest. The man was an absolute genius, and he was the second African-American. W.E.B. Du Bois was the first to graduate with a degree in history from Harvard University and studied at the Sorbonne, graduated from the University of Chicago, graduated from Berea College in Kentucky. I mean, the man had multiple degrees and was a master historian, genius, and scholar. And we owe him such a debt of gratitude with Black History Month coming up. A pillar of Black history, Carter G. Woodson, unbelievable. And anybody who hasn't read, the Miseducation of the Negro, where he said that, when he talked about if the Negro has no education, he will not only go to the back door, he will cut one for his own special benefit. His education makes it necessary. And he said in that book that the miseducation is the worst form of lynching, the miseducation of Black children.
Well, he delivered a powerful critique of what education has been and what it's meant.
What it's meant to be.
It's not delivering fulfillment and awareness as it's structured it's structured to maintain white supremacy. That's the point he's making, that the educational apparatus in relation to black people was to pick, select, invite in ones that could be molded into white people, and therefore maintain this idea that everything good, everything great, everything of value, everything important comes out of the white culture experience, and to also validate the lack of value that comes out of the black race. That's what our education system did. Now the system doesn't say that anymore, but Yusuf, I believe, WD, in too many ways, that's still the problem. So when I have educators, deans of universities and colleges on this show, I've often asked them, you talk about inclusion and reducing the gap, and all of the approach to the lack of progress, quote unquote, in the educational experience by black people in particular, brown and black in general. You lay at the feet of black people and brown people, suggesting its deficiency in them and in their culture that make it difficult for them to achieve and to close the gap. You don't blame the system, the process, the curriculum, or the intent of the apparatus, but others have called the apparatus itself a criminal enterprise. Criminal enterprise because it sustains a way of life and a process, a way of looking at the world that elevates this idea of white exceptionalism and the manifest destiny that white people see themselves being here to rule. I had the story to personalize this. One of my neighbors and I were talking. Neighbor is a black guy out of Chicago, married to a white woman. And way back in the day, they were sitting and talking. He talked about being on her family's farm. They own acres and acres out in North or South Dakota. And over the course of evening, dinner or chat or something, the elder white guy in the family said, after all, white people run the world. And it was a casual remark, but obviously one that deeply impacted my neighbor, who felt he had to share that with me and my wife as they were visiting. But the idea of it is not only illuminating, but it burns you up. Burns me up, put it that way. I'll be personal again, that there's that audacity and that arrogance, and where we are now, again, Yusuf and WD, I think is at a place where we can pull the cover off of that theater. That's what it is. It's a narrative, a theater, a process, a system that allows white people, white supremacists in general, to not be accountable for the damage they have delivered on humanity. And it doesn't say that dysfunction is theirs alone, that we can't be as dysfunctional as them. We can be. We're human beings, and they are too. But there has been, and there is a record of the atrocity that they visited on our people and on the indigenous people of this continent and other places as well. And so we have to understand that these and what they have done represent failings in humankind. And that doesn't diminish the accomplishments and the achievements that they've created. We have to look at those to see how those accomplishments and achievements, maybe as often as not, go back to African knowledge, African science, African information. So we simply cannot allow ourselves to be enamored, and like deers with headlights caught, transfixed by what white culture says it is to the world. White culture says, that the white idea is God and that they own it. So that's my comment. Go ahead.
The irony is that the notion of white supremacy hurts white people too. Their history, their humanity is extremely damaged, and it's a form of mental illness, systemic, across generations, and imposes negative superiority images on them and their children. I was talking with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, which I don't do often. And he shared with me that 25 years ago, they believed that it was the responsibility of the workforce to adapt to the workplace. And he said it cost them tens of millions of dollars to realize that it was the responsibility of the workplace to adapt to the changes in the workforce, because Asian people who they were trying to hire were saying, you know, I'm lactose intolerant. How culturally appropriate are the foods in your cafeteria? And Black women were saying, I'm not interested in my baby's diapers being changed. Do you have an early childhood education center at your corporate headquarters? And, you know, they wanted the best and the brightest. They were going to all of the historically Black colleges and universities, and they found themselves being interviewed about how inclusive and how welcoming, valuing, and respectful their workplace was, not how bad they wanted to come and how much they wanted the people to bring them into these white institutions, but what kind of value-added benefit there was going to be for them for even considering going into them. So this notion of white supremacy is all permeating. It gets into the DNA of politics, education, economics, and culture, and the damage just has ripple effects that go across generations that people really clearly need to understand. This CEO told me, he said, when we're looking for the best and the brightest, we're looking for people who can relate to people of color, to immigrants, to people with special physical needs, to women, to poor whites. And if they can't build the capacity and develop people to their greatest creative potential, we're not going to make any money. You know, so we have purely capitalist intentions, but it involves people having a worldview that is respectful and one that relates to other people who don't look like them as coworkers, not as subordinates. And if they can't do that, they can't make us money. They're not going to be part of our management track, you know. And I was impressed that even for capitalist intentions, that he would be bold enough to lay that out on the table and say, hey, you know, it may be about making money, but the only way to do it is by being inclusive, by being welcoming, valuing, and respectful. So if we identify any employee who doesn't live up to that criteria, they got to go, okay? Because they're not going to make us money. So it's interesting that the corporate community, in some respects, is ahead of, you know, the medical community is another one that awoke to these facts decades ago and is really trying to do something about it in terms of diversifying their workforce and looking at, you know, culturally appropriate means of communicating and treating diverse populations. But, you know, I mean, we live in a world with a global economy where news travels instantaneously around the world, where a single slip of the tongue can knock a corporation out of the Fortune 500. And we're seeing the awareness in law enforcement and criminal justice, in education and across the board. At the same time, we're seeing the pushback where people are saying, well, we convicted Derek Chauvin. I think we've done enough. We can go back to business as usual. We've got all these carjackings and we need more police, not less, and this defund the police nonsense, you know, which really wasn't what it was about. It was about reform the police and reform the allocation of dollars.
It was about accountability.
You know, you don't send somebody with a gun. You know, if somebody falls and breaks their arm and the paramedics need to show up, what does somebody with a gun have to do?
Exactly.
You know, so.
WD, jump in. You've been kind of quiet there.
I get wound up, WD.
Yeah, I say. Well, I say exactly. When I was thinking about the point we talked about miseducation, and I went back to a previous interview I had with Crown Shepherd, especially with young Black boys coming up, and she was really dismayed at the reading levels as it was for young Black boys, and which inspired her to write a children's book. The thing that showed up was that when they were asked, you know, these are, like, say, in the elementary school, why Black boys weren't doing so well in reading, their answer was, I don't see anybody that looks like me in these books. I can attest to that because I think all of you know. I remember I was growing up and seeing only these further adventures of Dick and Jane, not a black person in sight. Also,
Yeah.
when I think about the systemic racism involved, I think of my first point is about the libraries. When I say you look at look at your public libraries, see what percentage of them include black authors or on the topics of African Americans, both fiction and nonfiction. And that is another contributing factor to miseducation because the fact is how the narrative is being told, how it's being framed, how it's being shaped.
I noticed we've got a comment from Maria Jones. Maria, thank you for listening to the program on Facebook. And she says, I'm not sure which comment she was referring to, but she said, that's right, we should go back to traditional African ways. And Maria, thank you for the observation. Thank you for watching. We'd love to have your voice on the call. If you want to, I'm going to ask AZ to send you a note to invite you into the program. You could either do it like you're doing now with the more notes, or come on live with us. You know, but Yusef had also reached out today to our friend Deborah Watts. You know Deborah, right?
Sure, with the Emmett Till Foundation.
Right, yeah. She's in meetings, right?
She's also on the executive committee of the St. Paul NAACP.
Okay, well, I invited her in. She's in meetings back to back, she said, with Justice for Emmett Till. But tonight they're showing us the third in the series of Women of the Movement. I don't know if you watched that, but the first two detailed the Emmett Till story. And, you know, if you would, Yusef, sort of, and WD, talk about that story and how important it is for us to not forget to see, number one, how resilient we were and how we responded, lest the story prevails that we were docile and fearful and retreating in the face of continued oppressive injustice. That is not the case. And our response left to others would not be documented. Left to ourselves, we tell a different and a truer story. Yusef, what do you think?
Well, it's hard for me not to think about Emmett Till because Spike Moss and I and Emmett Till all have the same birthday. Although Spike is many, many years my senior. But Emmett Till went to Money, Mississippi in 1955, and many serious historians believe that the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision, the 1955 murder of Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi, and Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, in just several months after Emmett Till was murdered. And she has stated publicly that she was sitting on the bus thinking about the murder of Emmett Till and what his mother, Mamie Mobley Till, said, "We need to make certain that my son didn't die for nothing." When the bus driver went back and demanded that she give up the seat and told him, "Look, I paid the same fare as that white man and he's welcome to my seat as soon as I reach my stop and get off, but not a minute before. So you need to go on and do what you got to do." At which point she was arrested. And those three critical points in Black history are considered the sparks that ignited the civil rights movement in the United States. And Mamie Mobley Till insisted the sheriff of Sunflower County sealed Emmett Till's coffin, had him buried, and Mamie had an undertaker in Chicago have his body shipped to Chicago on the condition that the coffin not be opened. And she said, "I never gave permission for my son's coffin to be sealed," and insisted that the funeral home show his body in an open casket with a glass top. And more than 100,000 people in Chicago went through that church. And I remember vividly, Al, Leroy Gardner's barbershop on Central Avenue in St. Paul. He had a copy of that Jed magazine with the picture of Emmett Till in that coffin on the reading table for at least 15 years. And every time we went to the barbershop, he would tell us to pick up that Jed magazine and read that story about what happened to that boy, so we would know better. And Emmett Till, the rallies, there was a rally held in Minneapolis featuring Thurgood Marshall, Roy Wilkins, and Mamie Till that a lot of people don't know about. After the murder of Emmett Till, there were rallies held all over the country, which is the reason why the National NAACP has 2,400 chapters, prison, college, youth, adult chapters across the country today. The NAACP built its foundation on the rallies, the anti-lynching rallies held after the murder of Emmett Till. And there's one of my favorite books. It's called The Murder of Emmett Till by Timothy Tyson, a history professor at the University of Madison. And in it, he says that we are all the children of Emmett Till and have a responsibility to fulfill Mamie Till's promise that her son was not murdered for nothing. And there's just so many lessons, so many consequences, so much of value and worth that came out of the murder of Emmett Till that we can never forgive or forget what happened in Money, Mississippi in August of 1955.
WD, do you have a recollection of when you became aware of what happened with Emmett Till? Was there a point in your lifetime that you gained awareness? I don't know. I don't know how old you are. I was about maybe 9 or 10 years old. I think in '55. I was about 8, I guess.
I was 7.
You were 7, yeah. So I was 8. I'm a year older than you. I think you said.
Well,
and, go ahead, WD.
Okay. Well, I was only 3 when Emmett Till died. My brother was just a baby, but I didn't really learn a lot about Emmett Till until I went away to college, and we had a Black Studies department. Now I knew different things regarding what the Civil Rights Movement was as I was growing up, and I was in high school. Wasn't a lot mentioned about Emmett Till until I was in, when I looked at how those were interrelated, because I knew about the Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education, and also about what happened with Rosa Parks, but not that much about Emmett Till and the circumstances that led to him being lynched. However, what I've seen today is my son, who's 21, has gotten in touch with me, and he wants to talk about Emmett Till. As a matter of fact, he sent me a link so far as seeing the documentary about him. So his memory has not been forgotten. It is filtering down into this new generation of young African Americans.
Mm-hmm. I would highly recommend the book, The Blood of Emmett Till by Timothy Tyson.
The thing was, I heard was they called that. It was called a case called Reckless Eyeball, that led to him being lynched. And when I found out why,
in the book, The Blood of Emmett Till, in the first paragraph, Timothy Tyson interviewed the woman who he allegedly accosted, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Well, I guess they're all dead now. It doesn't matter if I tell the truth. That boy didn't do any of the stuff he was accused of." And because of her confession, the Justice Department, when The Blood of Emmett Till was published, reopened the investigation into his death, which unfortunately was since closed during the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
But
just recently,
she confessed that he did none of the things that he was accused of.
Yeah, amazing. Well, so the important thing, Yusef and WD, is that we keep this conversation going, that we both model and promote a willingness and a fearlessness in discussing things that are important to us, and do it with a certain intentionality. The intentionality, Yusuf, is that we value who we are, who we have been, and who we are becoming. And we know with certitude that the becoming is redemptive, not only for us as we grow into the memory of ourselves and as the pathway to the future of ourselves, but redemptive in that the impact of our presence inside the hostile environment, again, the criminal enterprise called white supremacy, that our movement is a shattering force. Our simply continuing to be and to believe in our own being in and of itself will destroy that which seeks to deny our humanity. And this indwelling experience that we have brought into the world, that we're bringing into the world, I think you said this, Yusuf, is what will redeem those whites as well. They are prisoners of their own ignorance, and they are fearful. And our ability to be our genuine, optimistic, and creative selves, freed from institutional and contrived self-doubt, freed from the incessant marginalization and oppressive institutional rulemaking and practices, freed from that, and not freed by them, but freed from it by our own effort. Our ability to know ourselves and be ourselves and reflect who we are in and of itself is a shattering of the artificiality of the world that we've been induced to believe is what reality is. I'm going off a deep end here, but it's what I believe. WD, Yusuf, what do you think?
Well, why don't I let WD go first?
I think that okay. I think he said I struck on a key word, authenticity. When we are being our authentic selves, when we are defining who we are. And when we are standing in that truth and speaking that truth to power as our African American, African born persons that we are an amazing, awesome, very powerful force, and that should never be underestimated.
Al, if I can pick up on your comment, at the Atlanta Exposition in 1898, Booker T. Washington said, "So long as you shall attempt to keep the black man in a ditch, you prescribe limitations on your own freedom of actions." And the quote I was trying to think of from The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson was simply, with respect to the Negro creating a backdoor for himself, if you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. And want to encourage people to think smart and stay safe.
Well, listen, there's a good article that quotes you a lot in the upcoming edition of Inside News, a piece that our friend and colleague Brenda Lyle Gray has written. It's on last week's conversation. We were interviewing people in the labor movement about actions they did this week on King Day and beyond, advocating for workers in the school system and advocating for other unionized labor in Twin Cities. But Yusuf, you weighed in heavily, so I want to encourage people to pick up the upcoming edition of Inside News, or go online and pick it up. I sent a copy to you in the chat there, Yusuf. You can look at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to close with this. And this is coming back both from Garvey and from Carter Woodson. Reading is so important, and what we read is important. How we read is important. I'm hoping, and so one of the things I'm doing right now is being a part of a kind of a book club with a narrative. I'm wearing the sweatshirt. I've been wearing it, and another one just for these shows, just to promote the brand. Narrative, the word narrative with a K, like knowledge is spelled with a K. Narrative is a social media platform that is being presented by Dr. Karen Hunter, famed educator and podcaster, journalist, and in collaboration with Dr. Greg Carr, the head of Africana Studies at Howard University. Greg Carr and she both are quote unquote monsters in terms of the power of learning and knowledge and command of the text that they bring. So they're doing in a subset of the narrative.com, a thing called Nubia, again, Nubia with a K, Knubia. And in Nubia, they're actually doing a weekly session on Monday nights. And this is the third of three. It's coming up Monday, discussing the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. I get all around that just to remind people that there's a place to continue these conversations. And when I was checked in a couple of nights ago, Yusef, they had, I think, almost 1,500 people in the chat.
Wow. Well,
this has become the largest classroom in Africana studies in the world and in the history of this technology. So what they're doing is building a capacity for us to discuss, know, and create governance. Governance, they say, is how we act to each other, what we mean to each other, how we present ourselves to each other and to the world, versus how we are treated or responded to by the social structure. They make the distinction. It's a great distinction. I'm learning this as I'm speaking and as I'm watching, but they describe the social structure as how the rest of the world sees us and how we show up and respond to the demands, the commands, the direction, the opportunity, the lures of the social structure that do not particularly have our interest at heart. And that what we have to do and have done and continue to do and must do with intention is be about a governance, something that comes out of our experience, our knowledge, our dreams, a governance structure that moderates or creates protocols for our engagement of each other. And so it's a great conversation. I want to tell who might be listening to, if you get a chance to, go to narrative.com, check it out, sign up, join, and become part of Nubia, Nubia.com. Continue the conversation.
When is it broadcast, Al?
Two things. The book review right now, the class is every Monday. It's called Office Hours. It's Mondays at, I think, 6 o'clock Central Time, probably 7 o'clock Eastern Time. That's for the current discussion. But the main program on narrative.com is every Saturday. It's live maybe once or twice a month now. It used to be every week, but Saturday mornings at around, I think, 10 o'clock Minneapolis time, you'll see Dr. Carr and Dr. Hunter holding forth. But you could go there anytime because they've created about 95 episodes over the past 2 years. And I tell you, it's fascinating, phenomenal, and validating and illuminating. We all gain, we all learn. I'm hopeful that the kinds of things we're doing right now, Yusef and WD, can find a way to fit so we can bring this brick to the institution that narrative is creating. It's open-ended, open architecture. All of us are invited to bring our bricks to build a new world, as Carter Woodson would say, that comes out of our lived experience and reflects our aims, our vision, and what we want for humanity and ourselves. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you all for being here. This is always wonderful. We'll see you next week. I'm Al McFarlane. Take care. Bye-bye.